share with you once again that I'm a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. And my focus is looking at, we begin here by showing that this is the head and this is the body. And these two are always communicating, and they communicate through blood, cells, and nerves. And when they're always communicating, the body's functioning optimally. We call that 100% function. We also call that a state of ease. It means everything's working real well and the individual feels real good. But when things start to fail, we develop symptoms. When we develop symptoms, this is when we typically go see the doctor, and we need that type of relief care. And when we develop symptoms, we call that a state of dis-ease and malfunctions within the systems. So it's not a focus on symptoms. I leave that to the doctors. I focus more on systems and why. So I'm always looking for root cause. What created this malfunction? What created this dis-ease within the individual? And fortunately for me, I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There's been foundation that's been laid down by some great pioneers, and it's becoming more mainstream thinking to really work on systems as opposed to symptoms. So tonight, I wanted to talk to you about sleep because, we always talk about diet, exercise, and then there's little talk about sleep, and sleep is just as important as diet and exercise. As a matter of fact, sleep itself controls our appetite, regulates our hormones, improves our memory, and balances our hormone. Recharges the body. So just to make that clear, so recharges the body, balances the hormone, improves memory, and controls appetite. Now, it's estimated that about 70% of Americans have sleep issues. We were just talking about that, how common it is. Last year, they estimated that there was about 60 million prescriptions for sleeping pills. So just to share that. And yet there's only about 6% of us that actually have the gene that allows us to sleep for 6 hours or less per night and still function optimally. So that means about 94% of us need minimally 7 hours, ideally 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Just to make this clear, it is not a sleeping pill deficiency why we end up with sleep issues. Sleeping pills can definitely be used as a short-term solution, I think, but it's always trying to dig a little deeper and find out what that root cause is. I just started talking about sleep eating, and just that basically it's about 70% of Americans are estimated to have sleeping issues, and that there's only 6% of us in this population that has the special gene that lets us have 6 hours or less hours of sleep per night. So we generally fall into the larger population of needing minimally 7, ideally 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night. So every living thing needs to sleep, obviously, and that sleep is dictated by light and dark. So animals, plants, they thrive in light, and when it turns dark, they go to sleep. In our bodies, in humans, we have built-in controls. When the light comes out, our body makes cortisol. Does everybody remember that word, cortisol? I talked about that. It's an anti-inflammatory hormone that the adrenals release in response to stress. But it's also, you can come in if you like. We're talking about sleep. Yeah. No, that's okay. Come on in. Thank you. And just talking about how light dictates awake time and dark dictates sleep time. And the body has these regulations that are built in. As I was just sharing with you, cortisol is what's released in the morning as soon as we see daylight, and melatonin is what's released in the body, that's another hormone, as soon as it sees dark. So it's really important that we emphasize that. Now, most of us probably say, well, logically we know that. We know that we're awake during the light and at night we're asleep. But it's essential to understand, too, that those patterns need to be regulated in in order for you to get that minimally 7, hopefully 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Every single one of us has a sleep-wake cycle. It's real individualized, but it's also referred to as a circadian rhythm, and generally it should look like this, where you wake in the morning, your cortisol is high, it plateaus throughout the day, and around nighttime it drops. When your cortisol drops, that allows, especially when the dark comes out, for that melatonin to be made. So melatonin is subdued all day long. This is all cortisol's job during the day, and then it's melatonin's job at night. Now, what happens when we don't get enough sleep? As I shared with you about hormones, it reverses the hormonal pattern. So that cortisol that I said should be high, and then it drops at night, and melatonin will then jump up. Melatonin becomes too low. So when melatonin is too low, it compromises all of the rest of the hormones within the body as well. So melatonin enhances prolactin. Prolactin is an immune boosting hormone. Also, when melatonin is low, it increases ghrelin. Ghrelin is what tells us we're hungry, and it reduces leptin, and leptin is what tells us that we're full. So there is a direct correlation between ample sleep and weight. There's a large relationship. There's a lot of doctors out there and practitioners that are arguing that if you just get your sleep patterns regulated, you're gonna lose weight. So now, as I shared with you, what happens when we don't get enough sleep? It reverses our hormonal patterns. I just shared with you, makes you deficient in prolactin, which is your immune. It increases your ghrelin, which tells you you're hungry, reduces your leptin, which tells you you're full, which means what? You crave food. And usually the first thing we reach for when we crave it, because our brain is telling us we need glucose, is carbohydrates. And it's not the hard-boiled egg or the piece of string cheese that we're grabbing for, which is more protein-oriented and will give us more sustenance and satisfaction. Instead, it's the carbohydrates. And those carbohydrates are what give us the weight gain. Okay? Now, one other thing, though, that also becomes deficient when you don't get enough sleep is the growth hormone within the body that helps you repair. So sleep is our time for repair. It's for rest and recovery. Okay? So our busy, busy days that we put in, and then nighttime is there for rest and recovery. So when you're not sleeping well, it's really common for someone to think, gee, what did I do right before bed? What prevented me from sleeping so well that night? Really, I want you to start thinking, what did I do that whole day and those days even preceding? What are my habits? So, for example, blood sugar. Do you remember me talking to you about blood sugar in the first session, for those of you that were here? Okay, so about 70% of Americans have blood sugar issues, whether you fall on the side of hypoglycemia or you fall on the side of insulin resistance. I don't know if you remember what insulin resistance is. It's when we eat so many carbohydrates that insulin starts to, where it usually tells the body to put glucose into the cells and into the liver and into the muscles, it shuts its door and says, I can't do it anymore when you're eating too many carbohydrates. And so instead, that gets placed into fat. So, that was just a little recap. 70% of Americans with blood sugar issues. So, blood sugar is something that you need to manage throughout the day. And that's something that I really tried to emphasize with you in making sure that in each of your meals you have a protein, you have really good fats, and your carbohydrates mostly consist of vegetables, some fruits, and some grain on the side as well. So not a lot of breads and pastas and things like that. You know, always think breads and pastas don't grow on trees. If we were to really eat what bread and pasta is made from, that whole wheat grain pulled straight from the dirt, then we would get B vitamins, we would get lots of the nutrients that the body needs. But instead, it's been processed and refined and broken down. So, just getting back to the carbohydrates, so it's really important to balance that blood sugar. And a real key to that is starting out with a really good breakfast. I know a lot of us are shooting off to work, and we may not have that time, or we may even put off eating breakfast until a little bit later. But when we do that, we're actually creating more of a hunger pattern. And when we create more of a hunger pattern, we stock up later and later in the day. And that, by the time we get to sleep, is creating blood sugar issues. Okay? So, so what did we do during that day? Did we have a cup of coffee after 2 p.m.? So any of us that like to have that late cup of coffee, that very likely can be interfering with how your body has been able to metabolize caffeine. Some of us don't have really great receptors in metabolizing caffeine as well. So keep that in mind if you know that about yourself. I personally have a cup of caffeinated coffee and I'm shaky afterwards. So I don't think I metabolize coffee very well. I'm more inclined to drink decaffeinated. But that's something to really think of. So once again, so what did my day look like? Did I eat some balanced meals today? Did I eat enough? I'm glad this is working, right? I just saw a yawn over here. No. So you know, did I eat a balanced meal? Did I drink caffeine a little late in the day? Is that something that I've done? Some other things that you can think of too is how about that, you know, you may enjoy that glass of wine in the evening with your dinner, but it shouldn't be too close to bedtime. It really forces your body to metabolize that sugar, whether it's wine or any type of alcoholic drink. So those are some key things to think about. Some other key things of why, what we did during the day that to just consider, you know, why I couldn't sleep that well was what type of pattern do I have at night? You know, I remember when I had my children and I was just grabbing every book I could possibly find on how to get them to sleep at night. It was always about setting up some type of habit. Okay, well, I'll turn down the blinds at 7 o'clock after I give them a bath at 6:45, and at 7:20 I'll give them a little massage, and then I'll read them a book, and then I'll turn the lights off, and then I'll put them to bed. Didn't always work like that, but I love the idea of, you know, at least putting a habit into place, right? Because that really just got, you know, it taught my child, and it trained my child. Okay, you didn't have a sleep-wake cycle develop, so I'm going to really just work with you on developing that. And yet for ourselves, I think we neglect to do that. You know, we get so caught up with, okay, finally, the kids are in bed, or I finally have some time for myself, I'm just going to sit down, and what do? We turn on the TV or the electronics or the news, which I would highly encourage you to never watch the news an hour or 2 hours before bed. It's always bad. I don't know if I've ever heard anything really enlightening ever on the news. So, you know, really try to stay away from anything that's negative or derogatory, even a real high, intense, like a crisis type movie I have a hard time with before I go to sleep because I'm thinking about it. I can't believe that woman let him do that, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, those are the types of things that you evaluate. Gee, did I watch something or did I review something that I shouldn't have, that could have prevented me from falling asleep so well? So those are big things. The other key thing too, though, is light. You know, we have so much artificial light in our lives now. And really, when you think about where we were, you know, 100 years ago, it's candlelight. And that was real dim lighting. And that melatonin that I shared with you that is made in the dark, it has to be fully dark. They've done studies where they've shined a blue light on the back of a leg while the person was sleeping in an entirely enclosed dark room, and that caused the individual to produce less melatonin. So it really has to be a dark environment for you to have that. So getting to that habit is, what is your habit? You know, is it a bath with a little bit of, you know, maybe some Epsom salt with some magnesium in it, which is a cofactor and helps you make melatonin, or maybe a little lavender that just helps you relax? And then is it reading a book and no Kindles? No, I'd say go for the hardcover, or go for the paperback, something like that. You know, just no electronics. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that, you know, electronics actually alters your brain waves, and they've done EEG studies on this. So, you know, turn them off. Definitely turn off all electronics. So, and I typically try to do that around 8 o'clock at night in our household. And you know, the thought process is, if it gets dark at around 8 o'clock right now, then really you should be going to sleep no later than 2 hours after that dark time. Now, I know that's a tough one because then you think, well, what about winter? And there is actual, there's a thought process to all of this in the seasons. Summertime, we get to stay up longer, we get to stay up later. And originally, you know, the way that the earth and the sun and the rotation and how the individual was supposed to respond to that was by storing up in the summer. So that those extended hours allows us to eat more. And if we're eating more, then we're storing up for the next 3 seasons until the next summer comes around. So, there's actual, I always refer back to the day or times when we were running away from dinosaurs, but, our bodies haven't evolved that much since that time. So, that's definitely something to think about. Now, something else, when I talk about those balanced meals with a protein and some really good fats, protein has an amino acid in it, well, animal protein specifically, tofu does as well, but it has an amino acid in it called tryptophan. Tryptophan is what makes serotonin. Serotonin is what calms us. Serotonin makes melatonin. And then melatonin makes prolactin. That's our immune defending hormone, and it's just another one of those connect the dots. So it's really important that you recognize that there's enough protein in your meals. And these are all things that I wanted to, of course, these are tools that I want you to walk out and say, okay, I can do all these things. But if you come to me and say, and you may not know this, and maybe through a process that we assess, gee, I don't think I'm breaking down protein very well. It's very possible. And there's things that we can do to kind of support that so that you can, those needs can be met. Now, I also wanted to talk about, though, too, as far as what happens when you wake up in the middle of the night. That 2 to 4 a.m. or 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, there's usually a window in there. And there's quite a few reasons for that. Could be, I should say. It depends on the individual and what the circumstances were. One of the major issues is, and I've already spoke to you about this just a few minutes ago, was blood sugar. It's very important that you recognize that balancing your blood sugar throughout the day and making sure you have a meal in the evening with not a lot of carbohydrates but more protein and fats will give you that sustenance that you need to sleep through the night. So sometimes you can find out if that is my issue by getting up in the middle of the night and getting that protein or a little snack and seeing if that helps you go back to sleep. And if that does, then that means you've got blood sugar issues. Yeah.
Is it like warm milk? You can do warm milk to sleep?
It could be. It could be. I don't know exactly why warm milk has worked for some individuals. I'm not sure about that. It's a good question, though. I can definitely, It's warm, so that might just be relaxing. I'm thinking that could be. I'm not quite sure what else milk would have in it, though. There's lots of hormones, but I'm still not quite sure. Sorry about that. But, definitely identifying how to balance that. Now, I also say, though, as I just gave you the example of getting up in the middle of the night, I only want you to do it that one time to realize that you have a blood sugar issue. And you need to change your daytime habits, right, to accommodate that blood sugar issue. Because really, if you feel yourself wake up in the middle of the night, don't open your eyes. And I know that's probably a hard one to really relate to, but really don't. Because as soon as you open your eyes, you're stimulating your dopamine receptors. And your dopamine is that gas pedal I talked to you about. And remember, and serotonin are your brakes. So and that's when your mind starts racing. Now you're up at 3 in the morning, you know what time it is on the clock, and you're wide-eyed. So none of that. Really try to keep your eyes closed as much as you can. This is a cool little tool that I learned from Dr. Gottfried, and she studies yoga. And I can't quote the founder of this, so I apologize about that. It's some difficult to say Indian name. But basically, the theory is that on the right side of your nostril is your fight-flight mechanism, and your left side is your rest and digest. So if you're up in the middle of the night, you're awake, but you haven't opened your eyes just yet, right? Well, what you do is put your finger on your right nostril and take 5 deep breaths. And this is your right rest and digest. Which I found was quite fascinating. I've actually tried it. I did fall asleep. I don't know at what point, but I did. So, but take 5 deep breaths about 3 times, so 3 sets. So as many as you can, but doing it that way. So that's something to consider. Other reasons why you might be up between that time is that's also considered liver time. That's when your liver is really trying to process and detoxify. So that's why you may need to look at liver support as much as you can with just supporting the liver and cleansing. And remember, if the liver is experiencing issues, it's highly likely your digestive system is as well, because everything everything flows from the digestive system in through the liver. So if your liver is backed up, the digestive system probably has some issues with breaking it down. So that's the second reason. A third reason is hormones. If you're low in progesterone, which is one of the contributors to cortisol, it helps make some cortisol. If you're low in progesterone, then that can also be creating some restlessness and some sleeplessness. So it's definitely worth looking at your hormones. But as I mentioned to you, I'm going to give you as many tools as I can right now, so you can go home and say, okay, I'm going to try all these things, and wow, that may be just enough to get me just sleeping well again. So it's really key. The fourth issue why you may be waking up in the night is, and I've talked to you about digestive infections, and those are parasites, fungus, and bacteria, and they're highly active at night. So when you're trying to sleep, they're awake and creating havoc. So that's a fourth area to definitely explore as well. So those are kind of the waking in the middle of the night issues. Any questions? Is everything making sense so far? Am I explaining it okay? Okay. All right, let's see here. So I have a list here. Here we go. Sleep rules. And I put these together because I thought this would be a great way for us to go through it. So first one is develop that sleep habit. Really think about what is going to be your habit for yourself. You deserve this. What can you do to help help yourself get to sleep and stay asleep and sleep well throughout the night? Another rule is every hour of sleep before midnight is worth 2 hours. Yes, so highly valuable. To really try to get to bed no later than 10, if you can manage that, really 10 p.m. A low carbohydrate dinner, as I discussed with you, because refined carbohydrates, the body has a hard time trying to break down at night. So it's really important that you focus on a low carbohydrate dinner. And remember, good carbohydrates are vegetables and fruits and some grain. Have some grain as well. No wine or alcohol before bed. I'd say, as best as you can, abstain from that. That definitely can create some sleepless nights. I definitely fall into that category as well. I've noticed that. So no coffee after 2 p.m. Cut that out. And electronics off. I said at 7, and I put the includes Kindle. Sorry, Annie. Oh. I know. I know, and it's so nice because it has a built-in light. It's really convenient, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, I know. And no news, scary movies, right? Read something calming, inspirational, even. Exercise during the day. This is a really key one, too. Let's say you go to sleep really late at night and you get up a little bit later in the morning and you want to adjust that. So if you want to adjust that cycle, what you need to do is I want you to get up as soon as it's daylight, and you're not going to be happy about it, but I want you to go for a walk for 20 minutes because you need that exposure to the sunlight to stimulate the cortisol production, okay? And then later, just before bed, before 8 p.m., we don't want to stimulate the body too much, but before bed, before 8 p.m., I'm going to say that for the last time, before 8 p.m., go for a nice short walk as well, 15, 20 minutes, just enough to kind of relax the body. Let's see here. Take a bath with Epsom salt. I mentioned that. That has magnesium in it. Magnesium is a relaxant. It's also a cofactor needed for the body to make melatonin, so that's a great acid, something you can pick up from Rite Aid. A little lavender as well. I love essential oil, so I'll use a little lavender. Keep your bedroom temp below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So anything really warm, really hot, when you're too hot or too cold, it actually can wake you. It can create waking. Now, I heard this tip. If you try all these things, you're like, boy, that's still not working. I heard this tip that you take a hot bath, and then immediately after, you jump into a cold shower, and then climb into bed. Because reducing the body temperature actually creates great sleep. I don't know if you ever notice in the wintertime, sleep so much better than you might find in the spring, summer, and fall. I hear a lot of people say, I just heard it the other day from 2 friends I was talking to you about camping, I sleep so great when I camp. And I think that's because we actually fall in line with the moon, or with the sun setting and the sun rising. So really key. True darkness in the room. If you need to get just an eye mask, you can get an eye mask. I've heard of black sheets put over the windows, something like that, but you want real strong darkness in the room. And then, you know, if you find that a lot of these things aren't working for you, I've talked to you about elimination diet or any type of food sensitivities you may have. And remember, if you're eating foods that's creating chronic internal stress in the body, your cortisol is going to be up at night. And that's going to force you to have a hard time falling asleep at night. So to help identify any of those food sensitivities that you may have. And then lastly, I mentioned you can look at infections. That's something you can look at with me or a physician as well, if you suspect any type of infections. So, and I really said that I was going to try to cut this one, you know, keep this one down in time. I did well today, actually, a half hour better than last week. But we were talking about the digestive system, so a lot more